Right, brilliant. It's great to have you all here today for our September Tug, which is an accessibility special. And also a big hello to those who are joining us on the recording on YouTube, because it's also really important you're here. As with all of our sessions, we're going to start with a Menti. So if you could get your phone up and just type in that code, if you go to www.menti.co.uk, and then type in the code at the top of your screen, 87769586, and just let us know you're here by giving us a tap on the thumb so we can see. We've only got a few people with us today, but it would be really good to hear from you all as much as possible. So if you just menti.com and then the code 87769586, it's really worth mentioning this is completely anonymous. There's no way that we can see who said what or what you're saying. So please go online, get involved. It really helps us make these sessions as good as possible for us. Brill. So if I move on to the first question of the day. Would love to know what you've all been binging on streaming services. So it should have updated on your phone and you should be able to see an opportunity to enter some words as to what you've been watching on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever it is you use recently. Yeah, feel free to include podcasts or also if you've been reading any good books or anything that you'd love to share. Bake off, of course. Brill, I'll just give that another 30 seconds. If anyone's new, you're just joining us. If you go to www.menti.com and then enter the code 87769586, that's a really good way of getting involved, letting us know what you're doing, and also helps us keep in the loop with you all. So finally, what city are you joining us from today? Oh wow, we are like very global this morning or afternoon, depending on where it is you based yourselves. Cool, just give that another 10 seconds. And then finally, what does accessibility mean to you? Well, I can see one person's included emoji in that. So if you just have emojis that you think explain your feelings better, please feel free to send those as well. Like a squirrel.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not very good at emojis.
Totally fine. Cool. Just give that another second. We've got still got a few people coming and joining. If you're just joining us, www.menti.com and then the code 87769586 is the code to get online to this session. right now we're just understanding what accessibility means to you. So if you've got any thoughts, and then after this we'll go into our experts, but it's really good for them to get an understanding of what you guys know about accessibility to begin with. I think if we give it another 10 seconds or so, and then it will be over to Neil to introduce our hosts, and also Amy, who's going to lead the session today as well. Give that 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Any last thoughts or emojis or anything, please get them down. It'll be really good to see. Brilliant. Thanks. Oh no, I forgot there was one more question. How familiar are you with accessibility? So is it something you think about every day when you're going about tasks? You think about it ever so often, or you've never really thought about accessibility in the workplace? This again is totally anonymous. It's a non-judgment zone. So please just give your honest answers. It really helps our hosts know what they're dealing with. Perfect. Right, now I'm pretty sure this time it definitely is. Over to you, Neil. So yeah, I'll over to you to introduce Amy and our hosts for today.
All right, thanks, Charlotte. Well, I can introduce Amy first. Amy is one of my co-leads, who is very involved in the JLR, and she's going to be leading a discussion with Chris and with Emily. Now, the best thing is, I mean, I know both of these guys. Emily, I'm sure many of you will know, is an awesome member of the Tableau community. She runs the Tableau Fringe Festival, hosts the Vizzies, if you've seen them every year at the conference, is one half of one of the best Tableau podcasts out there. Chris also joins us. Chris is responsible for some awesome data visualizations. He's part of DataBlick. I think he's certainly at least one of my favorite ever data visualizations, all about the word girl. Apologies if I misremembered that, and I found that really influential. And yet, although both of these people are really sort of famous in the community for different things, they both also share a passion for accessibility in data, and that's what they've both done a lot of work in, and they're going to talk to us about today. So thank you, Amy. I know you're looking forward to this as much as I am, and let's start the conversation with Emily and Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Charlotte. So if anyone has any questions today, please feel free to use the chat box on the Zoom, and we'll be taking them from you guys as well. And because we're quite a small group today, please feel free to put your cameras on, and you can unmute yourselves and ask your questions yourselves if you would like to do that. So Emily, Chris, thank you very much for joining us today for our September Community Drivers Tableau user group. I thought I'd kick off by picking up that question that Charlotte asked in the Menti. What does accessibility mean to you? Emily, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm super excited to be here. I love chatting about accessibility and data visualization, so I'm pumped. So accessibility for me, it means that we're making experiences available to as many people as possible. It's kind of similar to the Microsoft definition of it, but with my own little spin.
Chris?
Also very excited to be here today. So thanks for having me. And thanks for calling out the word girl visualization, Neil. That one is one that I always enjoyed doing, also completely inaccessible, but it is a cool visualization that I was very proud of. So thanks for calling that out. Accessibility for me is really about making sure that everybody out there can use whatever it is that you're doing, right? And so a colleague of mine, Frank, always talks about the idea of curb cutting and making sure that we provide experiences that can allow everybody to do whatever it is they need to do, even if it's going up a curb. And one of the things that he always talks about with that analogy is the fact that if you take a look at that experience, it actually made it better for all sorts of people. It wasn't just people in wheelchairs that benefited from that, right? So to me, it's about trying to make sure that we provide our experiences to everybody, but also think about things from like a design perspective in terms of designing for that accessibility, right? Like if we can put our design hat on when we're thinking about what the experience is like for somebody using a screen reader, we may actually improve the experience for everybody.
Kind of a follow-up question then. How did you guys get started on your accessibility journey? Was there one key moment, or how did you get started? Chris first.
That's a good question. How did I get started? Honestly, like we, I'm here on my own behalf today, but I do also work at Visa, and we take accessibility very seriously there. So that was probably one of my main drivers to the fact that I need to do this. And then I kind of took that stuff from work and brought it to all the extracurricular stuff I do outside of work. And I quickly realized that pretty much all of my visualizations on Tableau Public are not accessible. And that kind of hit home with me, and I'm not sure I'm okay with that. And so that really led me down a path of how do I try to figure out how to solve that if I can, or is there anything I can do to make it even a little bit better than it is. And so that definitely was a trigger for me to get into this space. And then I kind of got connected with some people who care about, trying to do better in this space as well. And it just kind of went from there.
And for me, I was introduced to accessibility as a concept in 2010 when I was a business system administrator for a custom reporting tool that we had, and we were told we had to make it Section 508 compliant. And in the US, that's Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I worked in the public sector at the time, so it had to be accessible. But what I found was that there wasn't a ton of definition around what that meant. And even the definition that we did have, people interpreted it differently. And so I was intrigued because, especially from my background of being a bank examiner, where possible, I like to have the yes or no, the very linear approach. And it wasn't that way at all in accessibility. And then when I found data visualization, it was just in my mind, but I really hadn't acted on it. And then I was just kind of like dabbling a little bit, I think. And then I think the really pivotal moment for me, there were really like two big moments. One is that my daughter, who's 10, is dyslexic and has ADHD. And though one of the worst things in the world is to be a parent and have your daughter crying to you, why are they making it so hard to read? Why is it so, she didn't say challenging. Why is it so hard? The letters look the same, mommy, don't they look the same? And yeah, they did. It was I and L, like that's my example I go to all the time, but it was really challenging for her. And even the other day when she was like, mommy, why does the first letter in Disney, why is that a G? And I had to really think and flip it in my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, that does look like a G. She's like, doesn't that look like a G? I'm like, no. And then when I flipped it in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what she has to go through every day. And then the other kind of pivotal moment for me that really just made me want to do more is that I had a visualization audited by Frank, Chris's colleague or former colleague, and I was thinking it's non-complex. It's none of that data art that Neil does. It's not super fancy like Chris, like it's a pretty basic visualization. And I thought I'll probably get a couple of dings, but it won't be that bad. And then Frank looked at the visualization with the screen reader, and oh my gosh, it was so awful. And what I realized in that moment was I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, I didn't know their experience because I don't use a screen reader. And it was eye-opening to me. We don't all have the same experience. And when I could actually see their experience versus my experience, that was really eye-opening. So now what I like to do, I think because of those things, and because it is a challenging topic sometimes, I like to see if I can simplify it, communicate it out, communicate why it's important to consider, and just take iterative steps to making data visualization more accessible. That's my whole goal.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, really interesting. Kind of a follow-up that. So you mentioned that you had your dashboard audited. Do you have any tips or kind of things that our users should be mindful of when they're creating dashboards? Because I'm sure, like Chris said, I'm sure a lot of my stuff is not accessible as well. It's not something I've really thought about that much.
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, some of the things, one is put your visualizations in the order in which it is intended to be read. I didn't realize that, like, when I was just putting objects on my dashboard, because again, like, from my experience, it didn't really matter, but it matters to the screen reader. And Chris's blog post, he has a blog post where it talks about how you can change the XML to change the order so that it is ordered correctly. I have a very low key approach, like a low tech approach to that, where I'm like, I'll just number my worksheets and then put them in that order, because I don't know, hacking the XML kind of scares me. And I haven't taken the time to learn it. That's the big thing. So super low tech way is number your worksheets in the way that it is intended to be read. The other thing is to use headers, like use titles and headers, like those things are tagged, even though it may not, again, it may not appear to make a difference to us. It makes a difference to others in how that information is read. So because that's what I did, I took off a header and I applied like a text object, but again, because of the way it was read, visually it looked better than what was there before, but it just caused issues. And I think having high contrast, I used a color palette that I loved, and I knew that it was kind of iffy on some of the colors, and it failed on the colors contrast because not enough of the colors were high contrast to my background. And then, of course, one of my favorites is use fonts that are readable and easily distinguishable. Don't use Arial. That's my current thing, is don't use Arial. Use something like Verdana or something where you can distinguish the characters. There's enough spacing and you can eliminate some of those imposter letters. I think those are the big things that jumped out. I know Chris has had his one of his dashboards audited. So Chris, you can like jump in with any other tips.
Yeah, I can kind of yes and on top of everything you said, because what you said was extremely valid. One other thing that we'll see from time to time, especially on like public for some of those like fancier visualizations, so to speak, or designer visualizations. I don't know what the right way to describe those are, but people use, for example, you can't use custom fonts on Tableau, right? On Tableau Public. And so people will create images of text. And so if you're doing something like that, you need to be sure that you actually provide alt text to that text so that somebody who maybe can't see that text can actually understand what you've written on that image. And that would also go just for images in general, that you want to make sure that you've got some sort of descriptive alt text for those. So somebody who's navigating through your visualization with a screen reader will know what the image is or whether or not it's important to what they're doing on the visualization, things like that. I'm going to double down on Emily's comments about focus order. That is something we currently can address. It's not necessarily easy to address, but you can address it, and it makes a massive difference in my experience. You know, a simple way to think about this is if you're visually scanning the visualization that I chose for my case study, the title is the first thing you look at, right? If you're reliant on whatever default focus order that ended up being the case for that visualization as I built it haphazardly in Tableau, I think the title was like the 7th or 8th thing that you got to. So you were like navigating through charts without even understanding what the whole visualization was about to begin with, right? So just another kind of anecdote to double down on focus order, because I think that's relatively solvable. It just takes a little effort to really see how you're doing there. One of the things that's really hard to do these days in Tableau is keyboard navigation. And so that would be allowing a user who maybe can't use a mouse to interact with your visualization as a consumer. And that's one where that was my most recent blog, and there's just work to be done there. And so one of the things Emily was talking about is how it's kind of like a journey. Like I don't know if we're ever going to be done trying to make things accessible. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we're like, okay, I'm finished. This is fully accessible. I don't ever have to touch it again, right? I think there'll always be ways to tweak and improve, and maybe make use of new features as they come out to make things more accessible. So,
yeah. So I actually brought up a slide. Sorry for like mixing it up on you, but I brought up a slide that I'm using. It's not the exact slide, but I'm going to be using it in my conference talk. And it shows the experience. And so I want to share it with you super quick. You don't have to like fully analyze it, but I think just on the surface, you can see what I saw, and then you can see what others experienced. So this is when Frank went through and used a screen reader, and you can see all of the jumps, and he was trying to use, like I think he used multiple screen readers like VoiceOver and then JAWS perhaps, but you can see we don't have the same experience. And this was like this pivotal moment of like, oh, I really have to be aware. And so this, the order, that's what Chris and I are chatting about. Like, this is why it matters, because I can read it from top to bottom, but with a screen reader, it was jumping all over the place. So
Is that order based
that was
on,
like a good visual of like what we were just talking about.
so is that order based on like the sheet names and things like that?
it's based on the order within which you drag the sheet onto the dashboard. So you would literally, like, I think Emily's approach is like she gets everything prepared and then goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which will order it correctly. I normally build my dashboards like, okay, I'm gonna put this chart here, and then I'll put the title, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do that. Oh, I forgot to put this descriptive text. I'll throw that on there. And if you do things that way, your focus order is whatever you drag stuff onto the dashboard for. And the blog that I wrote about this really is rooted in Kelly Gupton's work that she shared through the Tableau accessibility FAQ, which I'll put in the chat too at some point here. But that she presented on that, and I basically just took the approach that she used and applied it to mine, made sure it worked, and then tried to like echo her fix there. But obviously it would be great if we could do that without having to go into the XML.
Have you looked at so one of the new features that was in 21.3 I saw was that you can drag stuff through the hierarchy now.
I saw that.
You can rearrange stuff in there. If if the reader is picking up the order in which they were applied to the dashboard, then I wonder if it's linked to that same mechanism.
I don't honestly know. I haven't played around with that yet. My guess would be no. But
well, obviously it'd be nice if it was. We can.
Yeah.
Oh so nice.
We'll assume not, but
the reason why I'm saying I don't think it necessarily will be is because as you drop things onto the dashboard behind the scenes in the XML, everything gets an ID that's like a numerical order based on how you dropped it. And it doesn't really matter where it is in your like container hierarchy.
It's just taking up the incremental ID.
Yeah. and that's really the XML hack, is just to mess with that idea to get things in order. That's basically all it is. And so I would be surprised if that fixed it, but I honestly haven't looked at it, so I just don't know yet.
This is an example where I'm kind of feeling seen. I'm working on a dashboard at the moment, which has just changed so much. And I have no idea in what order they are in, but I can tell you absolutely not the order it's supposed to be seen. So I have a takeaway from this already, which is probably to go and read your blog. But is the only thing available for me, if that's important, is the only thing to look at this XML hack, or to take everything off and start again? You know, are they the two options left to me?
I think so. Do you agree?
Okay, it might be plan B for me. XML sounds hard, but yeah, that's.
Well, so what I do is I mean, right now, what I do is I put stuff on my dashboard because I'm also like, I don't use currently, this may change soon, but currently I don't use a different wireframing. I just like a tool, I just put it on the dashboard, figure it out. And then, so now what I'll do, because I have a dashboard that I'm working on, is I will, now that I've kind of finalized where things are, I'll go back, relabel it. So it's just a matter of like dragging. And because I'm not doing something like Neil, like your data art, like that might be crazy, but for me, it's really more simple type of things. So like I'm not doing anything crazy. So it's easy enough for me to number my worksheets now that I know kind of the order, and then rebuild it. And so it won't take too much time, but.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking business dashboards too, not this rubbish.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that I know it does take some time, and there's one part of me that's like, oh, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? But I don't know who's going to see the dashboard. So because I don't know everybody in my audience, and because I call myself an accessibility advocate, I need to like, walk the talk. I've just thrown in like 3 cliches right there. So if you're playing cliche bingo, like you might win.
I just got one more to tick off, and then it'll be house from me.
I think that kind of links on to the question that Charlotte's posted in the chat. I can ask it, Charlotte, or you can unmute and ask it.
Yeah, I was just wondering about kind of like what, everyone does testing at the end of their dashboard and make sure that it's got, the right numbers and everything. But do you guys do specific testing for accessibility? And then did you get any pushback introducing these, which I think perfectly links on to the question that Brittany has asked afterwards. So maybe we focus on those bits, and then Brittany could maybe give her question.
So one of the ways, and I won't get into too much detail about what I do at work, but one of the ways that I normally try to go about at least sanity checking what's going on in my dashboard from an accessibility perspective is like a couple key things. One is just use a screen reader on it. And it did take me some time, honestly, to figure out how to use a screen reader correctly. I still don't even know if I really use it correctly, but I can use it good enough to try and see if the experience of a screen reader is even remotely close to the person who's visually looking at the dashboard. You could probably, once you get up to speed on using a screen reader, like you could probably figure out the answer to that question in less than 10 minutes. And so that's one that I think is relatively low-hanging fruit, with the exception of the fact that you have to learn how to use a screen reader potentially. The other thing to always check on is your color contrast. And so there are some specific things that you can do around the use of color in your visualizations to try and make sure that you're meeting both the text and geometry requirements for color contrast. They are different, so you can always rely on WCAG, which is where most of the stuff that we're talking about today is coming from, if not all of it. And so there's some tools that you could use where you can kind of sanity check, okay, I've got this text on this background and it's kind of getting hard to read. I'm not sure it has enough contrast, and you could check that. For example, the thing we started with, the Menti thing, there's no way that thing passes color contrast, right? There are some very bluish shades of text on the blue background, which look cool, but
It's funny, I picked, so we do a different color scheme each time because they're presets color schemes by Menti. And I looked at it and I was like, surely this is not accessible. And I was like, surely Menti, which is like a global organization, surely they would make sure it is accessible, and went with it anyway. But
what they could have done, for example, which is something you could think about in your views, if you really want to use that like lighter text color on a background that doesn't have enough contrast, is you can outline the text. And they do this a lot on like mapping. So like if you look at map boxes or Google Maps labels, you'll notice that they have like a 1 pixel white outline around their text, or a dark outline if the map background is lighter or darker, right? So you can use some of those tricks to like still get some of the look and feel of your color. But yeah, those would be, I'll stop there because I'm sure Emily has some yes hands to add to that, but those are definitely two things I would take a look at.
So, from a work perspective, I'm not really well equipped to answer that. And here's why, because I just started at Red Hat in April. And so I'm still getting acclimated to the culture and to the practices there. We also, and so just, disclaimer, I'm here as Emily, not Red Hat employee. But we have a decentralized model. We're global community of users, a lot of users. And because of that decentralized model, it's hard. One of the challenges is making sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. And accessibility may not be the first thing on their mind. It may be getting the dashboard done because my boss wants it done, or doing the technical thing because that's the thing that I need to do, or doing the thing that'll get me seen and relied upon as a reliable resource. And so I think about accessibility as changes in data visualization in particular. I think about that as a culture shift, and culture doesn't change overnight. And so what I'm doing, because like we can only control what we can control, right? So what do? When I get on data doctor sessions, if I notice that contrast is an issue or might be an issue, I will bring it up. We do have some accessibility built into our style guide, so we have that there, but it's also reminding people that we have a style guide and to, hey, don't forget this part. But I think that there's a gap that people don't know, right? Like the screen reader, I didn't know. And so if you're not using the screen reader, you may not know about it either. And you may not be testing against a screen reader. So I like to think about it, and I call it a journey because I don't think we'll ever be done. There's not ever going to be a 100% accessible data visualization. And so I think if we can make iterative changes, like I'm all about taking one small step, because those one small steps or one small change, that adds up over time. And that's why I say, like, let's make it more accessible. So like, let's use titles. Let's use a font size that people can read. Let's use colors that are contrasted. Let's do the easy, like the low-hanging fruit. If that's on your bingo card, you probably win now. But let's address the low-hanging fruit of accessibility, because then once we start, at least in my mind, once we start doing that, then I can have some more informed conversations with folks around, okay, so, we've taken care of these, but did you also know? Like I attack it from several different angles. And I also think about, like, this is also kind of like a culture thing, but I also think about, like, what's the person's motivation? And I also know that I may need to educate, or our team may need to educate managers, because do they know what accessible means? Do they know what good looks like? Because it's going to be really hard for that person to organically, that one voice that's going, hey, but change the font, right? Luckily, we have a good font that we use, but well, I guess that's not luck. That's probably science and intention. But I think about like, what can I talk about that is easy to consume, that's not going to meet up with a lot of friction, because right now I'm not at a good place where I can have a really robust conversation when there are other things that need to be addressed. So I'm kind of biding my time a little bit, inserting little tips here and there, low-hanging fruit. And then I believe we'll get to a place where we go from, okay, we've got good, now we need to make it great. And, you know, to a point that Chris mentioned also, like we were having a conversation internally and somebody was like, can we not use Jamboard because like, you know, we can't like a screen, I don't think a screen reader can read the little like Post-its on the Jamboard. And somebody else was like, oh, but I actually like, it's visually appealing. You know, I like, it really helps me tune in. So the reason why you may not ever have a 100% accessible visualization, and why I think sometimes accessibility can be challenging, is that you have different needs of your audience. And you know, what one person needs, the other person, it may conflict with what they need. And so that's why I'm all about like small changes, doing the best we can, and more importantly, knowing your audience. And when you don't, kind of defaulting to what would be best for the most people as possible. And with respect to like being inclusive. So sorry, like that was, I went on like a whole platform. I'm probably running for like accessibility office or something, but it's, you know, I'm like super passionate about it. So I'll shut up now.
Brittany, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I mean, you kind of already touched on it, and where my organization is at is I'm really trying to push for kind of our first, it's not even really a fleshed out style guide, but it's just, you know, dashboard best practices. And a lot of our dashboard creators are very much in the mindset of just get it done. You know, these people are clamoring for these reports. And if I say, hey, you know, red, green probably isn't the best, you know, it's kind of like, well, why are you slowing me down? So how do you kind of get people to see even those like little changes as meaningful, get them to care a little bit? Because I feel like sometimes I can come across as like, well, she just cares about the colors. And also when sometimes our company colors aren't necessarily great for accessibility, sometimes we, you know, move from using the Tableau defaults to slapping the company colors on it. And yes, sometimes company colors can be a great, you know, value add, but also sometimes I think, you know, the Tableau defaults are very scientifically thought out too, and can provide that contrast sometimes.
Yeah. So, well, there's so much there. Like, how do you get people to care? One of the things that I've got it in my talk, spoiler alert, but make sure you tune in, is like, imagine it's your most important person. Like, it really, to me, I'm all about like, who is the person I'm trying to talk to? Who is the person I'm trying to get them to care about? Like, there are some people where if I said, you know, imagine your most important person and imagine that they feel confused and overwhelmed and they can't understand and they feel foolish. Like, some people are really going to resonate with that and really going to go, oh, like me. I'd be like, oh, I don't want that to happen. No way. My kid, my person, my whoever is going to get like the same thing as everybody else, right? Like, that's going to be my rally call. But there are other people that are going to be like, whatever. And so then it's like, okay, well, imagine you have a decision maker who doesn't want to look foolish on Zoom or in the boardroom, and they can't understand what's being displayed on the dashboard. So how can you help them? And like, we have experience from my prior organization, we have that example where a senior advisor was just like nodding a lot. And then when we used colorblind friendly palettes, he was like, oh my gosh, like best day ever. He didn't say it like that. That was me. But he was like, I finally get what people are seeing. And it was amazing. I also think I'm also a proponent of using high contrast, red and green. Like, I think that there's such a strong tie there that red mean, like, we know red means loss, negative, bad, whatever. So capitalize on, like, leverage that and just make it high contrast. I love a good like dark red, mint green that's accessible. And so I'm using red and green, but I'm using it in a way that still is accessible. And then you can shift. And when it comes to company colors, I mean, or company fonts, like, I think it's like start having the conversation, right? Like maybe they don't know. Maybe Tableau doesn't know that Arial probably isn't the best font to use for their presentations. So let me say something. And that's kind of how I approach it. But Chris, I'm sure, has like a bunch to add there.
One thing, I think you covered a lot. One thing I will add is we weren't able to get away from red and green, right? So the way we addressed that was to create a red-green palette that would work for people who have red-green color blindness as best we could. So we put the time and research into using the color tools that are out there to try and create that palette and share it with the company. And now if somebody's got a red green dashboard, instead of telling them you can't use red and green, we say you need to use our palette for red and green. And that will help you, meet these other requirements that you have from that perspective. So kind of just doubling down on something Emily just said. The other thing I wanted to add that I completely passed over is people listening to this or watching it may not even know where to start. Like, what does it even mean to be accessible? Where can I go to like find something that will at least tell me to some point like what I should even be thinking about or looking at besides calls like this, right? And so our colleague Frank has come up with what he calls chartability, which is kind of like an audit system for accessibility in specifically data viz. And he's broken it up into kind of two levels of detail. One is a high level like 10-point check you can do. So if you need to like just do a quick assessment of where you're at, and this is what he did for my visualization, it's 10 things that you look at. And I forget how long it took him, but it wasn't very long. And I had like 8 things I needed to fix out of the 10 things. And then there's also a much more granular piece to it that is gets into the depths of like the WCAG requirements and things like that, which I think is what he did on yours, Emily. But anyways, chartability, I'll put a link to it in the chat. If you don't know where to start, after looking at some of the content that you can get from the Tableau community, that's also a great place to just have as a, I don't want to call it a checklist, but like a set of requirements that you could definitely look at to try and do better.
Awesome, thank you.
You mentioned WCAG. For anyone not on the call, who's not familiar with that, including myself, can you expand a little bit more detail on what that is?
Yeah, it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, I think. And so this consortium gets together and defines what the guidelines should be for providing content on the web. There are different levels. So it's like level A, level AA, and level AAA. AAA is like fully compliant, like you're doing like rock star type of compliance. In the US, there's also section 508 that meets the AA standards of WCAG. So there was an alignment probably in the last couple of years. 508 in the US had been kind of outdated, and then they brought it to be more current and align with AA. Oh, and Chris put the links in the chat.
That was great teamwork. I was linking while you were chatting.
Perfect, thanks. Does anyone else on our call have any questions that they want to ask live to our special guests?
While we're waiting for somebody to ask another question, Matt posted, I completely forgot about this, so I'm really glad you posted it, Matt, but there's an update in Tableau where they, in 2021.3, is that out yet, by the way? I forget what version's out. It's out, okay. So theoretically, it's out in the newest version. What they're doing for focus order, the improvement that they tried to make, because Tableau doesn't really know what focus order you want to put right? And so what they tried to do is just default to, let me make sure I read it right, top, bottom, left, right. And so in a lot of cases, that should help you get a reasonable focus order if you have a simple dashboard, especially if it's tiled, where you're at least going to start on the title on the top left, right? Now, if you've got a dashboard where the title's not on the top left, like I've seen some examples where maybe you have like a scatter plot and all the points are on the top and right, and so you put the title on the bottom left because that's where there's space. So that'll be a situation where this wouldn't work for you. But the bottom line is, it sounds like they did roll that out. It will help in some cases, so I'm really glad you brought it up because I forgot to mention it. And you probably will still have some cases where you need to go in and try to tweak that order to match the experience you'd want your users to have. So thanks, Matt.
Anyone on the call have any questions that they want to ask?
I had one quickly. So we've spoken like a lot about Tableau here, and obviously we are a Tableau community, it's a Tableau user group, but are there other tools that do it better? Like, is Tableau behind in the kind of like market of this kind of thing? Or is it that actually it's just something that's not really been thought about? I don't know if either of our experts will know the answer to that, but I thought it worth asking.
You want to start?
Yeah. Oh, spoiler alert. Yeah. Chris, you can add to that.
I'll give an example. So we were working with a team that was using Power BI for some public-facing dashboards, right? And one of the things I realized as we were working with them, because we were helping them with like some screen reader testing and stuff like that, is that you can actually navigate the marks of a viz in Power BI. And so that's something, for example, that you can't do in Tableau. Now, have I done like a full audit of like, you can do this and this tool and this and that tool, and so this tool is better than that tool? Definitely not. I don't have time to spend on that. But I think you're going to find that some tools will do certain things better in the space and other tools will do less things better in the space. And if we just think about it from like, what is it that we need to do in this tool to get better? There's a few key things we can go after. We've talked about a bunch of them today. The other thing is there are a lot of other libraries out there. Like, so at Visa, we open sourced our chart components, which have a significant focus on accessibility in them. And so we spend a lot of time, for example, in that effort, trying to make sure that our keyboard navigation patterns match the way you would visually like benefit from a visualization, right? So like if you're looking at a stacked bar chart, you can key nav the way that you would visually compare like slices of a stack in a bar and things like that. So there are definitely various tools out there that have strengths and weaknesses. That's why I wrote an article for Nightingale around use the right tool for the job. Like, there's so many tools out there now and so many ways to go about doing this stuff. But I think the bottom line is there's definitely a lot of work to do on the Tableau side. And the more we can provide feedback to Tableau that we want this work to be done, the more chance it is they'll have the resources in place to do it. One way I tried to do that with my blog series was to kind of end each blog with like an idea on the forums to try and get upvoted. I was a little sad. The last one I did was around keyboard navigation, and I tried to make this big push for getting people to upvote the idea to see if I could get it to like spike really fast and get Tableau's attention on it. But alas, I don't have the skills that Emily does in terms of getting people to do things. So yes, I did get some upvotes, but I don't think I got the scale that somebody like Emily could have there. So.
Well, thanks for that. And I think you were very nice in talking about the industry. I agree. Like the industry, I think as a whole has some work to do. And I am really unapologetic when I talk about this. It's disappointing that Tableau is not more of a leader in this this aspect of the industry, because they are a leader in so many other aspects. And I'm also very straightforward. I hold them to a very high regard. So for me, it's personally disappointing to see that I've even put on my mom voice. I'm personally disappointed that they haven't taken more of a leadership role, especially when I can go out and like I'm leveraging Microsoft definitions. And while Microsoft is a more mature organization, I think, you know, there's opportunity for Tableau to really take a leadership role because it's still like nobody's figured it out, especially with interactive vizzes with like a bajillion marks. Well, first of all, don't do that. But I mean, the interactivity, there's so much to figure out in this space that there's really an opportunity for Tableau and the Tableau community members to really take a leadership role and be resources. There are organizations that are providing more information currently. So hopefully we can affect some change by having conversations like this. And like to Chris's point, like raising the issue, getting Tableau's attention. So that's my hope. But yeah, Tableau is behind.
Mm-hmm. And just to, yes, and there's so much research that still needs to be done, right? Like, how do you convey a 1,500 point scatter plot to somebody who is using a screen reader? They can't key nav 1,500 points, right? Like, that's not going to work. So there's a ton of work that needs to be done there, and that work, whether it be doing the research or actually implementing the features or whatever the case may be, needs to include everyone, people with disabilities, people who can't use a mouse, like people who can't see, like those individuals need to be a part of this, or we're going to run into the situation where we're trying to build for somebody without understanding their experience in the first place, and we're probably not going to get all the way where we need to be. So those are definitely a couple things. And I agree with Emily that, you know, Tableau has been a leader in the space for a long time, and this is something that they haven't really taken that step to be a leader in the space on. So it'd be cool to see them do that, because like Emily, I hold it with a high regard and would want to see them do better here.
The screen recorders, sorry, not screen recorders, screen readers. Do you have something that you could demo for the people on the call that might not have seen anything like that before?
I have a couple of videos on one of my blogs that we could look at if you want. I don't know if we're getting close to time though, and if you want to like do that on the way out, or whichever way you want to do, that's fine. I can demo it though if you'd like.
Yeah, if we do it now, and then it might prompt some questions, then we kind of wrap up after that.
Sounds good. So do you want me to share the one that's the default experience first? I guess we'll say. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. That's good.
It's a proof of concept application. Data visualization group. You are currently on a group inside of web content. Workbook, coin flip game, 811 wire version, frame. You are currently on a frame. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow. Total gains 1 $1 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 group. You are heading level 2. Total gains 1. You are dad daughter group. You are currently in the group. Dad group. Dad. You are end of dad group. Daughter group. Daughter. End of daughter group. End of dad daughter group. You are currently in the group. 1 group 1. End of 1 group 2 group 2. End of 11. End of.
So you can see here, like I got frustrated as a visual user that I'm going like in and out of every single one of those access titles. And that's actually something that we weren't able to do that long ago. Like they just recently enabled screen readers to see the access titles of the viz. I'm going to go forward a little bit just so we can get to the data table. See if this is close enough. So now I've opened the table of the chart.
Full data tab, name, showing summary, tape, player, column 1 of 16, game label, game, help, 2 of 80, well, Row 11 of 81.
So this is where you can get to this table if you enable data access. So for example, in some public visualizations, the creator of the visualization won't actually allow you to get to the data table. And if that's the case, you can't even get to here, right? But if you are here, basically one of the points I make in this blog is like, you're at the discretion of whatever you put on that sheet is in this table, right? So for example, if you have some formatting calculations or other things like that, which I have a ton of in a lot of my visualizations, those things are in here. A great trick that I always use is like, if you want to label, you know, the min or max point or the last point, or do something based on a table calculation or something, you may have additional fields for like, this is the label, and then there's the trick where it's null except for where you want it to label, whatever. Those fields are going to be in here, and they're not going to make any sense to the user who's keyboard navigating this, because it's really like an internal field to your visualization. So this is what it's like to key nav the table. I'm gonna, because we're short on time, I'm gonna jump to the other one, and let me get to where. Okay, so here, I'll just play this one. So this is my like proof of concept where I tried to use some of the stuff we did at Visa and open sourced in our components to try and improve the keyboard navigation experience of this specific chart. So it's a very specific test.
Application. You are currently on a heading level 2 inside of web content. Heading level 4. This demonstration is an attempt to enable keyboard navigation directly on a Tableau visualization. You will navigate to additional instructions next. Heading level 5. Note. Once the chart is focused, hit enter a second time to start keyboard navigating the bars. Display keyboard instructions. Collapsed button. Display keyboard instructions. Expanded button. Note. For voiceover users, Mac, press.
So one of the things we do in our components is we couple the chart with instructions on how to navigate it. Now, if you noticed on the Tableau one, there was a few instructions that were built into some of the headers, but obviously if you're not navigating the marks, they don't have keyboard instructions on how to navigate the marks yet.
And hold, shift.
I'm going to go through, this is all navigating the instructions. So
you are currently on a text element inside of web content. Display keyboard instructions, heads and tails by game. Shows 2 diverging bar charts for dad and daughter by game, depicting the number of heads and tails flipped by each player. Navigate into the chart area by pressing enter. Bar group, which contains 40 interactive bars. Image interactive bar chart. ID, this is a test application. Log, interactive bar chart. ID, this is a test application. Game 1. SUM, number of records, 9. Player dad. SUM, heads, 4. SUM, tails, 5. Bar 1 of 40. Group. Interactive bar chart. ID, this is a test application. Game 2. Interactive bar chart. ID, this is a test application. Game 3.
So you can see now, instead of going into the table and trying to find the thing, I'm key nabbing across the bars using the embedding API. And then at one point, I also enabled, you could like jump to the
40.
bar below
Group.
to prepare.
Interactive bar chart. ID, this is a test application. Game 5. SUM, number of records.
So there we jumped from dad to daughter in one click. So if you were going to try and do that in a table, you'd have to go down like 30 rows to find the game and find that you're on daughter, and then also find the matching game. So you'd have to remember that before. So I can stop sharing there. But really the point I was trying to make in my write-up is it took me like a few hundred clicks to try and answer a question. And by clicks, I mean like screen reader navigation actions, to try and answer a simple question: who had more heads in a specific game? And then with the more direct keyboard navigation capability, we were able to answer it in far less actions, right? So that's an example of like designing to improve how a user could answer that question if they were using a screen reader.
I have a question off the back of that statement. Your idea, your mention of it took this number of clicks to get to an answer made, in my mind, it made me wonder, is Ask Data, is these, are these functionalities of Tableau or Q&A and Power BI or whatever you want to use, ThoughtSpot, is that the future? Is that going to help us in bridging that gap? Or do you think it would be even worse? Because obviously, I think the danger with Ask Data and Q&A, etc., is the like the context and the fact that, you know, it really struggles to understand what you mean by certain terms like customer. Being from a bank, though most companies have customers, we often find it really struggles to tell to count, you know, transactions. Customers have many transactions happen to many customers, and that's where our data really struggles. But do you think if we do that well, that's going to help us because it's going to resolve the need for screen readers?
I don't, if I let me like play back your question, make sure I understand it. Was it that, are there like things we could do with AI to
Yes.
try and like automatically describe the visualization to somebody? Is that the main thought?
Yeah, and to like use AI to help support. So, you know, it's not having, like, we can take steps out of the process of getting answers, which is what people are using dashboards for.
Yeah. So as of right now, my thought on that would be it's probably going to be a situation where we can't, as of right now, we can't do good enough with AI to solve that problem, in my opinion. Like, there's so much out there about AI bias already. I think this is a space where that would run rampant. And then also, to your point, like the context of what means what, there'd have to be a lot of training on those models, which they can do. But I do think already in the industry, we see examples of companies trying to use AI to just solve this problem easily, and not really doing not really providing a product that is actually solving the problem, right? So as of right now, my thought would be, you're not going to be able to just like throw AI at this and fix it. And also, like, people are still going to need screen readers, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's an AI description or a manually generated description. People are still going to need to have assistive technologies that help them use computers and phones and all this other stuff. So I think honestly, like, down the road, we're probably going to be in a situation where you're always going to have a need for human intervention here, like human thoughts and human-centered interaction thinking and stuff like that, to help make sure that you put the best experience forward. Could there be situations where like AI or some modeling or something could potentially help you? Possibly. Like, you know, one of the things that we look at for our chart components at Visa is like, can we provide a statistical description of what's going on the chart? That might be something we could potentially like create some logic to generate, right? Like this chart has, this scatter plot has 500 points, which can easily be clustered into 4 clusters, blah, 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 blah. Like that, maybe that could be helpful. But I do think there's always going to need to be humans looking at that and trying to help it along as well. I don't know if I answered that well enough, but that's my thoughts on that.
And Chris has all of the thoughts on that. I don't really have a position or a thought on AI yet, because I'm currently trying to just tackle the low-hanging fruit of accessibility now.
Well, I get my bingo if you say it 3 times, so I think we got it. that was the extra bonus one in the middle. Listen, thanks guys. I feel like we could talk for ages, but it's probably a good time to bring this to a close. What I would say to everyone who's here is just do what I've done and just go to the chat and click on everything, because there's so many great links there that we can take out of this. And I was going to start by sort of meekly apologizing that this was such a sort of small group, but it didn't take long for me to think, no, this is perfect. This felt like a brain date. This felt like, you know, a few of us had you all to ourselves, and I've learned so much from this today. And I don't know if I talk for the others on this call. I think we all probably have as well. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Emily. We'll have. Oh yeah.
Can I just say something super quick for folks who are watching this later and who are like, just like, I feel overwhelmed, right? Like, there's a lot of I mean, my personal thought is there's a lot of overwhelm to this. Like I mentioned how I can solve for one, but then I create an issue with somebody else, or I'm not solving for everybody. So like, what do I even do? It feels hard. There's this perception that accessibility means ugly charts. And I think, no, like accessibility can mean that you create really beautiful experiences for people. It can help you be innovative. And when you're overwhelmed, I think that's the time to just take one action. Like I said, like take one step. You're not going to solve everything, but the one action will help you get there. And I think if you think about it like a journey, and just like your Tableau journey or your data viz journey, like it's a journey. And so I just wanted to leave folks who are watching this later with that message, because it can feel like a lot. It can feel like, this isn't my high priority. I would say if you incorporate it in the visualization, like the design up front, that'll help you prevent rework later. And just do what you can now, like make it accessible for as many people as possible, not 100% of the people. So I just wanted to share that because there's maybe somebody out there thinking about that, and I wanted to talk to that person.
That's awesome, isn't it? Because we may feel that we all have just one takeaway that we could actually do sort of quite soon. One of my last companies, we used Arial, and I'm there thinking, man, we shouldn't have used Arial. If I'd have had this conversation, or if we'd have had this, 2 or 3 years ago, I'd have come straight out and I said, you know what, you were right when you told me we shouldn't use Arial, and I said, no, we have to because it's corporate font. I would have said straight away, no, I get it now. So that's like my kind of one takeaway that's like right at the top as a really quick win. And hopefully anyone listening to this will think, right, that one really affects what we're doing. And that other stuff too, I think we should be thinking about that maybe one step at a time, as you say, in a level that doesn't overwhelm. But I can see we have the passion, because we could almost it's like we could start again now here and think, right, what should we do for the next hour? But maybe we have to have you on again next month.
I've definitely got a whole long list of things to take back to my team as well. All new things. It was a really interesting and informative session. Thank you both very much for coming along.
Personally, I would love it if you shared out those takeaways on social media, so that way people who didn't attend or who might not think that they need this to watch it might be curious to check it out.
We will. We'll be. They're pretty quick on getting the videos turned around as well. So anything we share out on social media will be, alongside that. Don't just take my word for it. Here's the link. And here's Chris. Here's Emily. They say it best. So I think we'll get a lot of take up from that. A bit more than our niche gathering that we have here this morning / afternoon.
Back over to Menti.
Okay.
Just had literally, it's just 2 questions on Menti, I promise. And really, really quick. I also, you'll be pleased to know, have changed the color font, Chris, so you can let me know if we are now more accessible or not. But for those who are unsure, if you go to www.menti.com, enter the code and give us a bit of love on this, just so as we know that you are online and made it. And then really what we just want to know is ideas for our next tug. I think we'll be back in January, because this is right at the end of September and our next session will be December. But who wants that when we're going to have loads of Christmas parties this year, thanks to COVID being over in our dreams. So really any topics that you guys think would be good to have, learn more about, discuss, please shout. We do these for our members. And if you are watching on the recording, and you always watch a recording, please feel free to pop these to us on LinkedIn or on Twitter or however, because we're really interested in making sure we're doing the right things for our audience. But I love the idea of adoption for data viz best practice and managing up as well. So I think they kind of align together, which are my favorites. feels like we have large organizations on the brain today. So it's probably one for us to think about for the next session for definite. But yeah, please keep them going. And then the next one is actually a new question. We've never asked this one before. Oh, sorry, there was one more there. I'll go back. Getting buy-in. Brill. I'll give you another 10 seconds. Feel free to submit more than one as well on the topics for the future. The more the merrier. And Menti should allow you to just keep typing once you press enter. But I'll give like a 30-second warning. For anyone who's like manic typing away on their phones. Right, 5 seconds. Brill. And then any speakers for the future, people who you think will be really good, you really want to hear from, super interested. It'd be lovely to have your ideas, thoughts, anyone you think would be good. Maybe if you could also put their names and then the topic, that might also be handy. Having just used my actual brain and realized this might be hard. If you have got specific people. And if you feel comfortable shouting out why you've recommended either of those two, please feel free to shout now, or don't worry, message us or resubmit with a reason or whatever, we can work it out ourselves. Brill, we'll give that another 10 seconds. And then one final question from me. Chris, is this a more accessible Menti color scheme?
Sorry, I was on mute. Possibly. You need to check the text, like Paul Chapman, that text against that background might be getting close. Text is 4.5. So if you get the 2 hex codes, I could check it for you and let you know.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't know if anyone has used Menti, but you can't actually pick your own color schemes. They have their own schemes that you just use.
One thing that I do sometimes, you can get eyedropper tools for your browser and stuff like that, but sometimes I'll even, like if I have multiple screens going, I'll use Tableau's eyedropper to get the hex code, and then I could check those. And then there's, if you just Google like color contrast checker, there's one out there that's pretty good. And you could double check that. So I would say probably fine, but like it's close enough that I would check it. The title I thought was fine though.
Interesting. I saw everyone writing down hex code checkers at exactly that moment in time. So I think if you want to create your own, you might make a bit of money in that business.
Well, one of the things I was thinking would be great for Tableau to have is a contrast checker, right? Like as you're building your dashboard, if Tableau gave you notifications that you have text or images or whatever that isn't passing contrast, that would be great. And it's you can do it. It's just some math to do those comparisons based on the values of the colors. So it's definitely something they could do. I forget if I made an idea for that or not. I think I did. So we should all go upvote that idea.
I was going to say, I think one of the takeaways is that we should all go upvote Chris's ideas.
I'm fine with that takeaway.
Definitely.
Amazing. Well, I guess at that, I guess it's a really big thank you to Chris and Emily for joining us and sharing all your insights. I personally have found it really useful, and my head is about to explode from ideas and brains. So your little talk about being overwhelmed as well, Emily, was super relevant. And then also big thanks to Amy for facilitating all those questions so well, keeping Neil and I in on time and in charge as always. And I guess we'll be back in January, probably, one of the topics that someone has suggested. So yeah, just keep sharing, join us on Slack, and keep in touch. Until then, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.